Last month's state budget and economic forecast projected a $1,867,000,000 surplus for the next 2 fiscal years. That is $831 million more than the surplus predicted by the November 2014 forecast, just 3 months before. Surpluses are a welcome change for Minnesota. Before last November, 10 of the previous 12 state budget forecasts had projected deficits. They followed right after the last give-it-all-back tax cut frenzy in 1999, 2000, and 2001. As the saying goes, those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. As we consider what to do with this new surplus, let's remember how we got it. It resulted primarily from more Minnesotans working than ever before, earning more income, buying more goods and services, and thus paying more state income and sales taxes. Last year, the legislature and I cut state taxes for over 2 million Minnesotans through adopting federal conformity, marriage penalty relief, homeowner and renter property tax credits, and others. We did increase state taxes in 2013 by $2.1 billion. However, over $2 billion of that increase came from the wealthiest 2% of Minnesotans, large corporations, and smokers. The effective tax rate on middle-income Minnesotans actually dropped as a result of the combined 2013 and 2014 tax changes. So let me repeat. This current surplus resulted primarily from more Minnesotans working than ever before, earning more, buying more, and thus paying more income and sales taxes. Nevertheless, some people say now that we should feel ashamed of our state's economic success, feel guilty about having a surplus, and, quote, give it all back, close quote. $350 to every man, woman, and child in Minnesota. Well, as I said before, the legislature and the governor did that 15 years ago. They returned the expected surpluses to the taxpayers. Within 2 years, those surpluses disappeared. It's taken us over a decade to recover from those mistakes. Furthermore, if we, quote, give it all back, close quote, there's nothing left to invest in Minnesota. There's no money to give all of our state's 4-year-olds quality educations. There's no money to continue the tuition freezes at our state colleges and universities. There's no money to improve nursing homes, expand broadband coverage, or fix our aging roads and bridges. $350 might make our lives a little better for a little while. I'd rather invest it to make our lives better for a long while. In my initial budget proposal, I called for increasing our investments in Minnesota's children and families by $473 million in the next biennium. It included partial funding of optional all-day pre-K for Minnesota's 4-year-olds, providing free school breakfast from pre-K through 3rd grade, eliminating the waiting list for Head Start, and expanding tax credits to help working parents offset the rising costs of their child care. Now I'm proposing to invest an additional $735 million in Minnesota's children and families, for a total increase of $1.2 billion. Some want to give $1 billion or more back to ourselves. I prefer to give $1.2 billion more to our future. My supplemental budget would fully fund universal pre-K educations for our 66,000 4-year-olds, building on the success of our all-day K initiative. In 2012, 54% of Minnesota's 57,000 5-year-old children were enrolled in kindergarten. Now 99.6% of them are in free all-day kindergarten throughout Minnesota. Not only does that boost their learning and achievement opportunities, but it also saves working parents anywhere from $2,000 to $15,000 a year for private child care. My supplemental budget would also enable the University of Minnesota and MnSCU to continue to freeze tuitions for the next 2 years. It would increase funding for Indian education, for special education, and for the upcoming recommendations of my Child Protection Task Force. In addition to the child care tax credit, which I proposed earlier, I'm also proposing to expand the income eligibilities for both the working family tax credit and also the K-12 education credit to include more lower-income and middle-income families. Some people might question this additional spending for education. What they might fail to realize is that until recently, Minnesota had fallen behind other states in our expenditures for public education. According to the latest reports, while Minnesota's per capita income ranked 11th highest among the states, we ranked only 24th in K-12 education expenditures per pupil. In fiscal 2012, our state's expenditures for higher education were, in real dollars, the lowest they had been in over 30 years. Evidently, after leaders gave the state surpluses back to taxpayers from 1999 to 2001, there was too little left for our children and grandchildren's educations. We must not make that same mistake again. My supplemental budget also increases funding for nursing home employees, for the fugitive apprehension efforts by the State Corrections Department and by county law enforcement agencies, for chemical dependency and mental health services, and to support the $850 million bonding bill, which I will announce later this month. It's a bill for a better Minnesota. I believe in these investments because Minnesota faces real challenges ahead: providing better long-term care for our seniors, reducing the achievement gap and other persistent disparities, aligning our higher education to the jobs of the future without burdening our young people with insurmountable debt, protecting our children from abuse and neglect, and ensuring that our roads, bridges, and railways are safe. This is a budget for a better Minnesota.
The February forecast announced on February 27th was full of good news. Minnesota's growing economy, coupled with our balanced budget principles, provides this state with an opportunity that not all states are experiencing at this time. Over the last few years, we have righted the ship. We've engaged in balanced budget perspectives by repaying our schools, enacting strong revenues, carefully managing our state budget. We added $333 million to our state reserve last year to increase the rainy day fund to $1.344 billion to protect against future downturns. We have a positive budget balance for this biennium, for the next biennium, and for the 2018-2019 biennium. 60% of the governor's supplemental budget is invested in education, and Commissioners Poggemiller and Casilius will highlight those investments. Another 29% of the governor's supplemental budget is invested in health and human services and tax cuts for families. Commissioner Bowerly will speak to the tax cuts. I just want to highlight a couple more tax or spending ideas before I hand it over to Commissioner Bowerly. First of all, the governor mentioned we're going to spend over $50 million to help protect our most vulnerable children from abuse and neglect. This funding will improve our child protection services at both the state and local level. $68 million to increase the monthly payments for low-income families by $100 per month. This would help an estimated 70,000 children and 29,000 adults live healthier and safer lives. $25 million for rate enhancements at our nursing facilities across the state to increase worker salaries. $11 million to replenish our disaster account to ensure that we are prepared for the next natural disaster that may affect our state. And finally, $10 million for the Housing Job Growth Initiative, a program designed to build affordable housing in regions of greater Minnesota where local business and job growth would be enhanced with better access to quality, affordable housing.
As the governor mentioned, the supplemental budget proposes to expand the working family credit and the K-12 education credit, including the investment he made in expanding the child independent care credit in the first budget. These proposals will provide nearly $200 million in targeted tax relief to working families in Minnesota. The working family credit is one of Minnesota's most effective tools of fighting poverty, and the ripple effects help boost our state economy. It's an important source of financial resources for low and moderate income families. This proposal invests over almost $83 million in tax relief in two ways. First, it increases the amount of the credit for more than 257 families who currently receive it, including allowing families at $13,700 to get to the maximum amount of the credit. It also increases the income range for families for eligibility, which means 30,000 new families who make up to $55,000 will be eligible for the first time. This proposal raises the average credit for recipients to $769, providing working families real resources to help with some of their expenses. The K-12 education credit it will invest $11 million to expand this credit to help more Minnesotans afford school supplies and other educational expenses for their children. By increasing the income threshold to $45,000, this proposal expands this credit to nearly 17,000 new Minnesota families who would save an average about $300 each year on qualified education expenses. This credit will help parents provide their kids with the tools they need to succeed in schools. Finally, you'll recall in January, Governor Dayton proposed expanding the Child and Dependent Care Credit. Since then, we have traveled around the state hearing directly from Minnesota families who would benefit from this proposal, and we are working with legislators to find common ground on an income threshold. This proposal expands the credit to 92,000 new families by increasing the income limits and the maximum credit amount. These three tax credits combined will make our tax system even more fair in Minnesota. They help offset some of the taxes paid by low and middle income Minnesotans who pay a higher effective tax rate than some of the state's wealthiest earners. Strong working families are critical to the success of our state. Governor Dayton's proposal to provide nearly $200 million in targeted tax relief will make a real difference for Minnesota's working families.
In February, the governor released a bold budget focused on children and family. And with today's budget, he builds on his promise to ensure all Minnesota students get a great start to four-year-old universal pre-K, and that we directly address the needs of those students who are most vulnerable. In this budget, you will see additional 47,000 students in the first year being able to access universal pre-K. That means that school districts will no longer have to pay half the cost. This will be fully paid for and free optional care for families. And like the governor said, this could save up to $10,000 to $15,000 for families. The governor continues his commitment to special education children and to our school districts and funding of special education with an additional $40 million. In 2013, you might remember that we had an additional $40 million there where we provided some additional special ed accounting so that we could provide more resources to high-need special ed students. The governor asked me to convene a working group with our 11 tribal nations, and we convened a working group and brought forward historic recommendations to really take care of the nagging graduation rates that we're seeing for our American Indian kids and ensure that schools had what they needed in order to be successful for American Indian kids. So you'll see recommendations so that 138 schools, that builds off of the original proposal, which was moving from 32 schools to 62 schools, and now 138 schools across the state who have more than 20 American Indian kids will have the resources and support to directly help American Indian students. And then one problem that we're hearing about, and I've heard out in the press as well, as we go around, talk to teachers and talk to school districts, there is a teacher supply problem, and the state has a role to play in that. So we have a teacher workforce proposal that does three things. One, it gives tuition reimbursement to new teachers who are going into the field. Two, it builds back with paraprofessionals who are already in our schools and love working with our children, but don't have enough resources in order to go to school to become a teacher. And three, it invests in our teachers that we already have so that they can get multiple licenses. This will especially help our rural areas where they are not able to get teachers who have multiple licenses. So this is called our CAPS program, and so this proposal would put $25 million into getting 400 more teachers into our schools. I hope that over the next few weeks we'll be able to work with the legislature to understand that sometimes there are once-in-a-lifetime moments that come along. And it's my hope that we'll be able to look back on this moment where we've had the resources and say that this is the day and this is the session that we really put kids first and that we took on the achievement gap seriously. And we'll look at this as a day that we're able to get great results and give every Minnesota child an excellent education. Thank you.
Today's supplemental of $288 million, I wish it was billion, million, save students between 200, and these numbers are similar to the numbers the governor used with regards to what we could do if we gave the money back. For a MnSCU student, we're talking about somewhere between $290 to $1,500 change in what they'll have to pay in tuition for University of Minnesota and MnSCU student. For the most needy 93,000 students, with 757,500 new recipients, we're talking about increasing grants by an average of $350. Again, close to that number the governor's been using about tax relief. Some grants will be as much as $1,800 increased for the most needy students in the state to get to the post-secondary experience they need. So to sum up, the governor's recommending an additional $195.4 million in the supplemental budget, added to his original $92.49. So the bottom line is $142 million directed to 265,000 MNSCU students, 95,000 to 53,000 U of M students, 30 million of that for preeminence in medical research, and then finally 45 million for the most needy students, particularly in the state grant, particularly for independent working adults and middle class students.
So are you had the child care credit in the original budget, you expanded working family and K-12 expense in the supplemental. Is that as far as you're willing to go in tax relief, or is the goes on, are you open to other tax reduction ideas?
Well, compromise means you agree to things you don't agree with. I'm concerned about permanent tax cuts for the reasons I outlined in terms of the experience just 15 years ago and a decade of having to cut back drastically in funding for public education at all levels and borrow from the school districts and get ourselves in all sorts of financial shenanigans in order to try to cover up a very serious predicament of the state budget. So, I mean, I am very cautious that we not repeat that frenzy and that folly.
Governor, how about all-day pre-K for all? Lawmakers say it has to be means tested. That's the only way it could realistically get through. Would you be open to that in the end?
Well, I'm open to anything. I mean, some things would be better than nothing, but look at the phenomenal success of all-day kindergarten. 99.6% of our 57,000 5-year-olds are in kindergarten all day. The parents are working and they know where their kids are, and they know they're getting quality learning experiences, and why wouldn't we want to extend that to 4-year-olds rather than pick and choose who gets a scholarship and who doesn't? Scholarships, which are much more expensive on a per pupil basis than providing universal pre-K. But again, they're, and if I had my way, we'd have expand the scholarship program for children age 0 to 3 through 3, and then have all-day pre-K and then all-day K, and I think that would do more to close the achievement gap than anything else that's being considered.
Does this really fully fund it? All-day K, many districts said it was an unfunded mandate because of the facilities. Is there enough facilities?
Well, 99.6% of them, to their credit, are doing it. The state provides funding for it, and facilities, they've expanded or they've filled available space, but it's an incredible response to it. And I think that, and again, for working parents, it's saving a very significant part of income that was previously going to private child care. It's been one of the most extraordinary successes of my administration. Thank you, Mr. Vasilius.
How do you see this being structured? Would the students have to go to a school district associated program, or could they, if they were to a program in the basement of the nearby church, could that qualify?
I'm flexible. I view this as being so because of its universality provided through the school districts, but there's an overlap with kids right now ages 0 to up through 4 years old. A lot of them are in private child care facilities, and my hope would be and belief would be that there'll be an integration of the all-day pre-K and these other child care options. And some areas of the state have good private child care, and the schools might not have the immediate capacity to take on pre-K, and other areas would have schools available and wouldn't have much availability of private child care. So it's going to have to be knitted together. It's going to take a little longer and a little more intricately than the universal K, but I think we'll in a few years get to the same outcome where almost all of our kids are in quality programs and quality learning experiences.
I'm curious about the teacher workforce program. Given that there are licensure shortages in early childhood education, I mean, how much? I'm curious. One, whether this will be more generous than some of those other licensure areas that have shortages, and whether that sort of jeopardizes the goal of the universal pre-K, which requires all educators to be licensed by 2020.
Well, I'll let Commissioner Casilius respond, but I just point out all the attention given to LIFO, and there was an excellent analysis a couple of weeks ago that said that less than 2% of all Minnesota teachers, even during the economic downturn and the reduction in state aid for public schools, I'm sorry, less than 3% of teachers were laid off during those 5 years. 1/3 of teachers resigned or quit after less than 5 years in the profession. So if we want to look at quality teachers, which we all want, then we ought to look at the bigger problem, which is attracting and then retaining good, promising young teachers, and find out why they're leaving and why they're getting discouraged and what they're not receiving in terms of mentorship, in terms of incentives, whatever, and particularly in the rural areas, which have more difficulty finding teachers, especially those with special skills. But that's where we should be focusing our attention. I've heard from so many teachers in the last few years that they're so discouraged by all the rhetoric and all the bombastic attacks on them and their profession and their caliber that they want to get out of teaching, or they say, well, it certainly never encouraged my children to get involved in teaching. So we ought to look at the whole big picture and say, what can we do? We're going to be expanding career opportunities in education, whether it's very early childhood or all the way through, including higher education. Then we ought to, make young people aware of that's a growth opportunity, and ask them to join the ranks.
Governor, you mentioned today several of these items you said you're willing to compromise on with the legislature if they have different priorities. Is there anything in here that the UC is non-negotiable that you're not willing to give up on, you're going to go to the mat for?
Well, yeah, there are things there that are high priorities that I will work very hard for. I don't have any proposals or very few proposals from the legislature, particularly the House majority. So I don't know what is up for negotiation and what to negotiate with. I'm still waiting around, along with all of you, along with the people in Minnesota, to find out now after 2.5 months of being here what it is they propose to do with the budget, what their budget targets are, what their transportation funding